Hello, hello, everyone. Welcome to another wonderful presentation with Book Mecca. My name is Shaylin Scott, the founder of Book Mecca. Book Mecca is a online platform that celebrates Black authors across the globe, everything from amplifying their work, their voices, their inspiration, and trying to bring their books into your homes and making sure you have another story to add to your collection. So we have a very special author today, Hari Ziyad, who is a wonderful author who just has a new book that came out called Black Boy Out of Time. We'll be able to talk really in depth. So make sure, if you haven't already, share, tell your friends, join us today. And if you missed today's presentation, you can definitely catch the replay on IGTV. It'll be uploaded to Facebook as well as YouTube. So, as we get going, let me introduce Hari. Hari Ziyad is a cultural critic, a screenwriter, the editor in chief of Race Bader. They are a 2021 Lambda Literary Fellow. Their writing has been featured in BuzzFeed, Out, The Guardian, Pace Magazine, academic journals, and other publications. They were the managing editor of Black Youth Project, a script consultant on the television series David Makes Man, and Hari spends their time trying to get their friends to give the latest generation of R&B starlets a chance, which I get that for sure, and attempting to entertain their always unbothered pit bull. Oh, that's so sweet. So if you want to know more about Hari as well, I'll make sure you have um, their their website so you can follow along, find out what's up, what's coming next, where they will be speaking as well. So without further ado, let me introduce Hari. Oh, I think you're on mute.
Sorry. Hello.
Hello, hello. Welcome to the show. We are so happy to have you today.
I'm happy to
Uh,
be here.
where are you right now? What state?
I'm in California. If you're talking about geographically, mentally, I'm in a really great state. I feel
Oh,
good. It's been a pretty good, relaxing week. But yeah, I'm in LA currently.
I like where you're going with that. Yeah, I'm in Texas. We have viewers that are from all over. I think we even have some viewers that are in Ghana that watch and things too. So a little bit of everywhere. Headspace this week has been a little different for sure, but this is like my peace, my zen area. Anytime I get
Mhm.
to speak to authors and really pick your brains and hear um, what your motivations are, it really brings me peace and centers me. So thank you for that opportunity for sure.
Yes, and this has already been really calming and peaceful for me. So I'm looking forward to
All
this.
right, great. Well, I'm gonna try to get to as many questions as possible, and we're gonna dive right in. So, the very first question I had is the inspiration for the cover of the book.
Yes, it's a beautiful cover by this artist named David Cooper, who you should all follow if you're on Instagram. And the book really represents in the book. I'm writing across two different timelines. It's me currently going through what I was going through at the time. My mother was very sick. Writing to my younger self and just like re-exploring some of my childhood memories, but trying to talk to that person directly and reclaim that part of me. And so the cover represents both the adult self and the younger self as one, but still separate and still trying to find that connection. The dandelions, that's kind of a motif that comes up a lot in the book because in my first home, there were a lot of dandelions
Mm.
because we had a lot of weeds, but I
Mhm.
didn't know that they were weeds.
They're pretty
All
weeds.
the time. I love dandelions, and I used to collect them and think they were so beautiful. And I learned, when I was older, that they're weeds. They're something that you're supposed to want to get rid of, and I think that really exemplifies a lot of the book thematically. What
Hmm.
we're taught is disposable versus what we
Oh yeah.
um, know is beautiful, especially as Black children are oftentimes in conflict and
Hmm.
who wins out when in that tension. is something that I wanted to explore. So the dandelions coming from that the middle part between the adult face and the younger child, is
Yes.
representative of that.
Well, I tell you, my youngest daughter, she's an artist, and when she saw the book, she was like, "I like that." I don't know who did it, but she drew it herself and everything. It is a very touching and intriguing picture. I know when I first saw it, I was like, okay, well, let me see what this book is about. I had heard nothing but good things about the book, and you've been compared to authors like, I mean, the greats, like some James Baldwin's. I know in the vein of Audre Lorde, I've heard that come through. I've heard your memoir has been compared to Kiese Lemon's The Heavy. I'm
Who's
thinking
doing these comparisons? I want to meet them.
that's some heavy hitters right there. What do you think about that when your name is up there with some of the greats?
I mean, it's very flattering, but I think it speaks a lot to that's definitely a lineage that I tap into. All of those authors that you just named have inspired me in one form or another to great amounts.
Mm,
And so knowing that that's what people feel and hear when they're reading the work is really just affirming to the path that I'm on. I think that there's a lot more work to do to actually reach those levels, but I'm going to accept it. I am in a new stage of life where I'm willing to welcome um, the kind things that people
yes,
say and
take
the
them
compliments
all.
that people give. So I'll take
Well,
it.
it is definitely well deserved. When I read your book, there were parts of the book that made me cry, that made me reflect, even on my own choices, my own memories. I was thinking, as a child, you do kind of outgrow the things that you assumed were okay,
Mm.
and you constantly questioned yourself throughout the book. Was this something that you always have done, even as a child, or did this evolve as you started to go through therapy?
Well, it definitely has evolved through therapy and is continuing to evolve. But I think the foundation was really laid, and I talk about this a lot, by my mother, who was a Black woman who decided when she was 20 that she was going to convert to Hinduism and dedicated her life to doing that and raising her family that way and homeschooled us. So she was always willing to like push back on what was expected of her and question the things that were laid out for her, and really just a critical thinker. And so I think we were always taught to like question things. I think that came back to bite her because I ended up questioning a lot of the things that she taught us. But that also included questioning myself and learning how to do that in a way that wasn't filled with self doubt. I think questions can be very good and lead us to growth. And then there's another way that you can question where it can lead to um, resistance
Mm,
um, and so finding that balance has been something I've been trying. I've been much more um, aware of as I was an adult. But I think as a child, it was a lot more of just the questioning and just to figure out who I was and the place that I fit in this world. And then as I was learning all of these other things and trying to um, really grow into things that weren't comfortable for me, a lot of that questioning became harmful.
mm,
And so, to answer your question, I think it's a little bit of both, and it's definitely a journey that I'm still on.
yeah, yeah. I could, it's life is always a constant journey. I don't think you ever stop evolving and growing and changing and trying to get better, becoming a better whoever you are. Um, the writing in your book seemed very intentional on the stories that you selected, the memories that you brought out, even the writing to yourself. It seemed very intentional on the ones that you wanted to highlight. Were there some stories from your past that you thought didn't fit, or were these the ones that really wanted to to display the message of trying to make sure that you're making a change in the life and in the world?
Yeah, it was a little bit of both. For the most part, the stories that are included in the book where I kind of had an idea. At least
Mm,
once I got to the stage where I was like, I'm going to include these self-epistolary chapters, which came pretty late in the process. But once I started on a chapter, for the most part, it ended up in the book. There were a couple of things that I started. I was like, no, this isn't really the right time to really get into this. I would have, there was a little bit more that I wanted to talk about in terms of like childhood sexual violence and stuff.
mhm.
But you can do a whole book on that. And
Exactly.
from what I wrote, I'm like, there's so much more to say about this.
Yeah.
So I had to take that out. But I think for the most part, this was about the questions that I had for myself, and if I could speak to a younger version of myself, what would I say to them?
Hmm.
I've, without even knowing, I've had those questions and those concerns and those words that I wanted to affirm in myself sitting in me for such a long time already that once I opened the door to like, this is possible, they kind of just started to flow out.
Oh, yeah.
So,
That
yeah.
is great. It- As I was reading your book as well, I was thinking the younger self that you were writing to, what was the age of you?
That question came up a couple of times during the editing process. Um, And I kept pushing back on that because that's part of what I was trying to get at is that
Hmm.
the that part of me isn't tied to like a specific age. It's not even tied to just my youth. Like that's still a part of me now. Um,
Yeah.
and so there were definitely chapters that I wrote with like a specific time in my life in mind,
Hmm.
but it pretty much varied. And in the book, I think I um, named like a specific moment where I'm like, this is where I feel like a separation from my childhood took place.
Hmm.
And that was around like 10 years old. And so most of it, I had in mind a child younger than 10 years old when I was writing.
Okay.
But like I said, I think it kind of is hard. And I wouldn't want people to take away from it that those are only messages that I wanted to send to myself at younger than 10. I think through the process of writing the book, I was like realizing that those are messages that I still need to give myself now
Yeah,
in so many ways.
absolutely. A lot of what you wrote in the book, you mentioned those stories to yourself and this inner child work that you were doing, and it played a big part throughout the book. And I love the way that it was written. What was the pivotal point that kind of led you to embrace this type of therapy? I've gone through therapy myself, and I try and have all my friends go through therapy in different forms of cognitive behavior therapy and all different types that are out there. But I think this is one that I've been approached, but have not done yet. So it was interesting to see you do. What made you say, okay, I'm gonna try it?
Um, I don't know if it was any like one singular thing. I think what primed me to be open to it, because I think my therapist just like mentioned it all the time. I think it's something that he uses a lot. But
Mm,
what made me feel more open to it is the fact that the way that I was raised, um, we grew up with altars in the house, and we would put different ancestors on the altar and speak to them. And I had already started to um, think about how to repurpose that as I was coming to
mm,
my own spirituality and like starting to explore hoodoo and thinking about my grandmother and my mother who was sick. And so had set up my own altar around the time that I started therapy too. And I was like, this kind of feels similar. Like you're speaking, you're trying to build a connection with something or someone who the world is telling you is no
mm,
longer here.
yeah.
Um, and you're trying to still build a connection despite this like distance of it's not being in the material or in the physical world in the same way. And
Mhm.
so it felt familiar in that way. I was like, oh, this inner child work really feels like me trying to talk to my grandmother who's not here, or when I
Hmm.
was growing up
Okay.
doing um, work in the temple or with my mother. Um, and so, yeah, I think I still needed to figure it out, but that
Hmm.
gave me much more of like a foothold of like, this is what I can compare it to.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, you inspire me. I may give it a shot for sure. And probably some others work through some things for sure. Another part of your book that definitely kind of caught my eye was I'm a big Scrabble person. I love words. And you used quite a lot of words that I liked that were like, oh, I haven't heard this one in a while. Let me look this up. You had cited references on statistics, on health disparities, on um, the carceral state that we are in from the prison pipeline. I mean, this was so much. This is a memoir plus. That's probably what it should be, memoir plus, because it kind of made you dig. Was that intentional as well, or how did that come about?
Yeah, we started off saying that this was going to be memoir plus social commentary. I didn't want there to be to fit firmly in like the category of essays.
Hmm.
I wanted it to be able to talk about, to situate my story within the context which I lived through the story. And so, and I think coming from my journalist background, I'd been doing freelance journalism for a while, and I ran the site Race Baiter for a couple years before that. It kind of just was building off of that. But I knew that I didn't want. I don't know. I'm not a huge believer in just telling stories
Mm,
is enough to change the world. I mean, I know that you could go back and forth with people on that forever, but I think that there has to be more. And I know that for me, like whenever I change or really learn something about someone's personal story, it was because it was situated within the world at large in such a
mm,
um, beautiful way to help me understand like how this experience happened and why they were thinking about it this way, and
mm.
what is the social historical context of all of this. And so I wanted to do the same with my book just because that's how I learn, and I wanted people to pick up this book and be able to learn something that would change them.
Kind of speaking of the way that you learned, you mentioned that you were homeschooled and you have such a rich and diverse background. You have how many brothers and sisters?
18.
18 brothers and sisters. I can't even fathom 18 brothers and sisters. But you also had two very distinct religions in one home. How was how was that kind of growing up? Was it a constant back and forth, or did you kind of feel as if you were in the middle of the zone here?
Yeah, so my like I said, my mother converted to a branch of Hinduism called Vaishnavism. Some people might know it as Hare Krishna religion.
Hmm.
When she was about 20 years old, that was 20 years before I was born. They both of my parents have been married multiple times before they got married. Um, so most of those siblings are quote unquote half siblings. I grew up with all of my mother's siblings, so I don't consider them half siblings. She had 10. My dad has a total of 12. And so, but when and I'm the first that they had together. And when my mother and father got married, she was already very much a big part of her religious institution. She was very close to like what would be a pastor in
Mm, okay.
um, most churches. She ran our local service program in Cleveland, and so it kind of just made sense. And she was also homeschooling us, and she's was just much more hands on about her family. So it
Hmm.
made sense for us to just follow her religion.
Okay.
My dad. because I think they had both converted. It wasn't really ever a huge thing that there would be folks following different religions. They both have this very multi cultural religious um, ethic. They joined a bunch of multi faith organizations, and so he was just open to if she was going to be taking the lead in the home anyway, it made sense.
Okay.
It wasn't like a fight. And so, yeah, we grew up pretty much in the temple um, until we were adults and were able to choose what path that we wanted to go down. Once we were adults, we weren't really pressured any way or
Mm-hmm.
another, um, as long as there was like some faith component. Uh,
Okay. Okay.
so, yeah, it was definitely an experience.
Yeah,
But
I can imagine. I was reading your story and trying to envision. I probably should have listened to it on Audible too, so I could have heard your voice there.
I wasn't me doing the audiobook. We hired an actor, a really great actor, but
Okay, okay. Well, I
I
made
could
my own voice up in my head when when I was reading for sure. But kind of going back to your family, that's really highlighted throughout the book. What did they think about the book when you wrote it?
I mean, the responses definitely ranged. Um, it was hard because a lot of it is exploring my mother and my relationship with her. Because of her disease, she passed away right before the book came out. And when I started writing, it was like right when she had gotten diagnosed with cancer. So there was a lot of like things we needed to explore. She did not have the greatest response to me telling her that I was queer, and but over the years I've gotten a lot better than that with that. But there was still just so much
Hmm.
pain and questions. Uh, and I knew I didn't want her to leave without at least trying to start the conversation. And that's part of
That's good.
why I started set up my altar too, because I knew that there was more that I was going to want to have to share with her and experience with her when she wasn't here. So those conversations were difficult, but I think we were both on the same page that they were necessary. And I let whoever was featured heavily in the book read um, their parts before it came out. I didn't
That's
do a
smart.
Nova and Queen Sugar. I don't know if you saw.
Yes, I did. Yeah, she just blew up the world. Like,
So for anybody who was featured like really heavily, and there was some like back and forth with some of those, but I think because of how I approached it, and because I emphasized so much throughout the book that these are my recollections
hmm,
of the events. This is my
yeah,
interpretation. That doesn't mean that this is fact. And because I gave so much space for it to not be fact and for me to question that, most people had a really good response and were just like, "Tell your story."
that's good.
My dad did not have that response, but
Really,
I also included that in the book though
I
because
would think he would though, because well, you know.
no, my dad is a character, but yeah, he was like, "This isn't how I remembered anything," and I was like, "Okay," but then I changed the chapter to be like, "He says none of this happened," and then it became a chapter about exploring why we both remembered things and like what it meant to even get wrapped up in like a he said she said about something that's clearly impacted both of our lives now.
Hmm.
So then I got into like um, does the quote unquote like fact of the matter in that instance when we're talking about trauma that's carried from childhood, is that the of topmost importance, or is there like is the real conversation around what that trauma is?
Ooh,
um, and so I'm actually really glad that he pushed back on that chapter because it would have been something completely different if he didn't. um, and yeah, led to I think a deeper conversation.
that's that's good to hear. That's interesting to hear. I always astounds me how people's memories of the past is definitely different. Even within the same household, you grow up, those same instances sounds different from someone else's eyes and
Right.
perspective. And there's a part that a few pages within the book that I definitely loved were the photos that you
Mhm.
included. Tell us a little bit about some of these photos that came.
Yeah, so I was just looking through, and so each of the cantos there are three different sections of the book. I call them cantos because that's how our scripture, um, the Bhagavad Gita, is broken up. Each of the cantos of the book, as Black, queer, and free, and for the most part, they follow different stages of my life. So I was just thinking of those ideas, Black, queer, and free, and those stages of my life, and the stories that I'm telling in that section. And I was just looking for photos that really encompassed that. And so those were just the ones that really I was like, oh, when I see this gives me this feeling of being Black or being queer or being
Yeah,
free. Um,
looking at those dandelions and flowers.
Yeah,
So,
and I told you about the dandelions, and I think that one is that's for the Black section,
mm-hmm.
because of what I was saying earlier, of like what we're told is beautiful and disposable, and like me as a child sitting there holding that dandelion in my home in Cleveland, like really just encompassed all of that for me. So yeah.
And kind of speaking of the experiences as a child and those memories that we may have and the instances of growing up, you mentioned a word throughout your book, Misafropedia. Tell us a little bit about that. Where did that come from? I've heard of Missopedia, and
Mhm.
there are heard of Afro. So tell us about Misafropedia.
Yes, so Mesopedia means like a hatred or a disdain of children, which really we should be talking about a lot more.
That
I
part.
think we see that so in so many things we see how just like children are not given agency in this society, and I think that that's a system of oppression just as much as sexism, homophobia, racism
Mhm.
is a system of oppression and should be given the same weight of that. And all of my work really deals with the liberation of children first, in particular. I believe that if we liberate children, then the rest will hopefully follow. But so Missopedia, I was thinking about that term, and then I was thinking about um, inner child work and how the way that I was first introduced to inner child work didn't really have space for those systematic ways that a Black person in particular, might be separated from their childhood.
Yeah.
And then so I was thinking about how the specific way that Missopedia shows up in the lives of Black children, uh,
Hmm.
needing a term for that when talking about all the issues that come up in the book. And I was thinking about the way that misogynoir really opened up a lot of conversations when that term was coined by Moya Bailey. And so I was like, you know what, I can bring this word together too, and hopefully that will give people more room in their conversations to talk about this.
Yeah.
And so yeah,
This is
that's
your word. Yes. Okay. I'm going to steal it for sure.
no, please steal it, and it's not mine. It's something that we all experience. So I hope that we all being Black people who've
Yeah.
lived a Black childhood. So I hope that folks are able to use that to pinpoint their specific experiences.
It definitely resonated. You kind of even mentioned throughout the experiences growing up in the school system and how um, young Black children are looked at as a, you can even see that even today in 2020, children are disciplined more who are Black. They are not listened to in the doctor's office. You have everything from fear of the police to every system that exists, you kind of touch on as a child and as an adult. Were there some parts of the book you can kind of, I'm back up here. there there's some parts of the book that I was thinking you could get so deep in the weeds in just this particular topic. How did you stop yourself from doing that? Because I could see going all day in just one chapter on all the topics there.
Yeah. I think that also was helped by my freelancing, and like I'd written about so many of these subjects already, and so in my head I'd already had to do them in much shorter forms, but I could see how they were all connected because I'd started writing about them. And like I said, at the root of all of them, for me, is like a liberation of Black children. And so I'd started putting those pieces together of like, but I always came back to those two things, or two things: the liberation of Black children and the carceral state,
Mm.
prisons and policing. Um, and so, just drawing that thread through them, coming back to that. Um, I was able to very easily move from one subject to another because I had been doing this work for such a long time. But you're right; so many of those things you can spend
Yes,
much longer
yes.
with. But I don't think that was the goal of this book. I think this was a book about how all of these various systems converge
Mhm.
onto the lives of Black children. Um, and maybe there's another book that's just like I was saying earlier about childhood sexual violence, or just about um, uh, religion, just about the school system, just
Mhm.
about policing
All of
itself.
it. Yeah,
Uh, but this book was about how all of those things converge, and it's just building off of the work that I'd done already.
yeah. Have you done any speaking engagements?
Yeah, so I do not love them. So I haven't been, since I've been working in TV. I've been like, no, I'm not gonna do this because I don't need this to live anymore. I'm starting to do more now. Like I think I just it's pride, so people have started to reach out, and then
Yeah.
starting to be like, okay, I'm not working. But when the book came out last year, I was doing speaking engagements 3, 4 times a week.
Wow.
And thankfully, it was all virtual, or maybe not thankfully, because it's a different um, experience doing it virtually. In a lot
Hmm.
of ways, it's more draining. Um, but yeah, so once I was done with that, I was like, I'm gonna take a break for
Yeah,
a
that
bit.
much deserved. I can see why so many would want to hear your perspective and your voice after reading this, because this is, to me, it felt as if I was looking into the window of your life and just kind of watching it as it progressed. And it was so not just like a voyeur, but a way that kind of made me want to kind of move and change with you too. So I really like that part of the
That's
book.
so good to hear.
There were one part of the book I definitely wanted to mention, and I always find snippets within books that I want to go, ooh, I'm gonna steal this, put this in my head forever. And it's one sentence that says, "This society has conditioned me to believe that healing is just the muting of one's rage."
Mm,
And that reminded me of Baldwin's quote of a black man or a black person constantly feeling as if they're in rage all the time, or there are so many issues that exist that you could be mad about just
mhm.
as a human, but especially as a black person. How does therapy kind of bring that down, or how, if not therapy, how does this writing or what you do kind of bring down that anger, that rage, to make it more
Actionable,
there
or
we go. That's the word I'm looking for.
do something with it. Yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways, I think therapy for a lot of folks, and you said you've tried all different types, so maybe you've even experienced this. Does exactly the apps. Like I think when I was thinking about that, I was thinking of some of the terrible therapeutic experiences that I had, and
Mm.
where it was that they were just trying to be like, well, maybe you shouldn't be so angry, or have you tried to?
Just
Yeah. So
sympathy.
it's really important to find a therapist if you're going to go through therapy who's not going to do that. A good therapist will affirm that all emotions
Mm.
are valid emotions. Uh,
Yes.
that it is very normal and natural to react to injustice with anger and rage. Uh,
Hmm.
and then help you to not turn that inward, because I think that's what happens with a lot of us, and either we're turning it onto other folks within our community or turning it onto ourselves.
Hmm.
And so I wanted to redirect that, and we also know that there's only so much you can direct it towards the
Yeah.
power structures, because they have a vested interest in making sure that no one gets
Hmm.
as acting out their anger onto them. Um, and so for me, it was about like finding ways to reject that. One way, um, one of the things that I think is so important, and it was so important when the uprisings happened around Mike Brown, is like to not just be like, people who are focusing on the protesters who are burning things down is are missing the point, but to actually continue like actively validate
Yes.
where that's coming from. Like they're not just misguided. Like these are people who are actually expressing anger in ways that are very destructive, but hopefully can be destructive to the system as a whole. And some things need to be destroyed. Um,
See?
and I think if you can acknowledge that there are things that need to be destroyed, and that thing is not yourself, and that thing is not your community,
Hmm.
then you get on a path to hopefully getting closer to figuring out how to destroy that. And that's what I wanted to do in the book, is figure out how do I, if I can't burn down an actual police station, how do I get closer to providing somebody the matches?
Mm.
Or how do I um, get closer to just chipping away at it, if
Yes.
if that. So,
Just even thinking of the systems that exist or the structures that have been here, you'll ask people, why is it this way? Or who created this? Even just, I think of one in particular, the poverty line. Who
mhm,
created that line? Why is it there? Why is it not changed in 50 plus years? And the poverty level is considered to be so far. Just simple things from credit to why do we do things the way that we do? Who are benefiting from those things? And all of that. Being a change maker and breaking the mold, definitely. I see you
mhm.
doing that for sure. And
Thank you.
throughout your book, you mention a lot of really areas that you can do in the community and action items that you can do. Do you consider yourself an activist, or do you consider your writing as a catalyst for activism?
I don't shy away from this. If someone like, I think that there are a lot of writers who do this. Like, I'm not an activist thing. Um, I definitely am not like an organizer. There are people who have been, organizing in communities and have like actual organizing skills. And I think that's different from being an activist. I am interested in changing my society, my communities, and I'm working towards doing that. And so if that is what
Mm.
activism is, then that's who I am. First and foremost, though, in the way that I do most of my activism now. There was a time when I was out in the streets all the time, um, but that's less so now. Most of that is through storytelling. So I'm a
Mm. Okay.
storyteller, um, and I'm a storyteller who is writing for Black liberation, and uh, hopefully some of those words do something. But I think what the words do mostly for me is they help me to figure out how I act outside of it. Like I don't believe that words in of themselves are like this. It's weird for a storyteller to say this, but are this like magical catalyst thing. Uh,
Mm,
I don't see my words as like the most important part of my work in this world. I think my words are a tool that help me to do the most important work, which happens off the page, which happens in my interactions with my neighbors and my family and my partner and my community at large. And um, yeah, so that's a roundabout way, I think, to answer your question.
it's just conversation. So yes, I'm taking it all in. It kind of thinking too of you know, I always say being the change you want to see in the world. And uh, in my mind, writing is always that extension of action, an extension of something that is to come, from a movie to a story to a change in someone's life. It always starts with the words
Mhm.
itself. And the words that you have in the book, the words that you specifically choose to use, I think are what makes this memoir very powerful, for sure.
Thank you. Yeah, I think, and it's the same when like now I'm in TV, but what's most fascinating to me in watching anything on the screen is what's happening outside of the frame.
Mm,
Like, I'm always thinking about that, and I think a really great storyteller is always thinking about that, especially in a world that's so censored. Right? There's only so much that I could put on the page
yeah.
of what I actually want to say. And so I write for people who are going to read outside of that page and like think about what it meant for somebody to like actually put this on the page and what's happening in their lives outside of that and what can happen for me outside of this. Uh,
Mm.
and so I'm always trying to get to that place.
And speaking of censoring too, it brought to my mind too, as a writer, um, the powers that be, or those that exist that put our work out there. If you're not self-published or independently published, and you're trying to get one of the big publishing agencies to get your work out there, did you have any pushback from editors or those that read your work or that didn't understand your voice?
Yeah, I mean, I had a really great editing experience overall, but there was definitely a lot of pushback. More so, just yeah, just trying to figure out, we're dealing with really sensitive, heavy topics and coming from different positions and perspectives, and so there was definitely a lot of pushback. And one of the things that I'd learned through my previous work is just how to where to stand ground. And I'd been an
Mm,
editor before, so I know like what that means to be on the other side of it. And so, but I felt very confident in being like, this is a red line for me. This is something that I can work with you on. Or if you're telling me that you're having an issue with something, you don't necessarily know how to articulate it, I'm
yeah.
working with you to try to figure out what that issue is and how to address it. Um, but it's a lot of work.
Okay.
It
Okay.
was
So what I'm hearing is, if you are a writer and you are adamant in your story, don't back down. That's what I'm hearing.
well, definitely don't just take any critique and change your work, and definitely don't change what you believe.
Mm,
To me, what an editor is saying, I think there are ways to work with editors. I think it's helpful to be really clear about what your position is and then be like, okay, now that you know this, here's how to address. Because sometimes what they're arguing about, it seems like it's about what you're actually saying, but it's
mhm.
really just about like, you're not explaining this clearly enough.
Yeah.
And so you have to be able to know when they're trying to change what you're saying and when you can address that in other ways. It's
Mm,
really helpful to try editing somebody else's work, even if it's just a friend. And like, I'm so grateful for the editing experience that I've had because it taught me so much about writing. And so yeah, for for writers who haven't had that experience, I would say try and get that experience even on a smaller scale if they can, because
Okay.
it will prepare you a lot more for when those moments come.
That's definitely very helpful. I've come across a number of authors that love to tell their story, or they want to write about their history or their background, and it's so personal that it's hard for them to take that critique or to take those changes, and they feel as if the changes are telling the change a story about who they are as a person or their upbringing. But I like your perspective on it's probably just the way that you're saying it. They want to make it clearer. So,
Yeah, and that's not always the case. Sometimes they are trying to tell you to change it, but I think you have to be able. And sometimes it's just asking directly, like,
mhm,
"Are you telling this is my position? Are you saying there's something wrong with this?" And if they can't explain, no, this isn't. But I think a lot of times we mix those two things up,
yeah,
and um, if you're working and you want to have a good working relationship with an editor, it's good to give them space to be doing the latter, and not just trying to change you.
okay, yeah, I like that. I like all those gems. I'm taking notes and trying to get through all my questions too at the same time. Well, there was a part that you mentioned too throughout your book that was kind of spoke to the idea of this black excellence that we constantly feel we need to achieve. If you are brought up in a poor household or a poor neighborhood, you feel you have to get out, you have to do the best, and then you have to give back or be the best at whatever it is that can create its own anxiety behind it. As a sibling of one of 19, 19,
Of a
right?
million, you're about to say of 1 million.
Yes, I was one of 19. Did you feel as if you had to over exceed those expectations that were there that were really created in your own mind? Because most of the time they don't really exist. But
Yeah. It wasn't so much the siblings thing. Like that pressure didn't come out as much from my family or my mother even. Like once she pushed us out into school after she'd homeschooled us until high school, she basically just was like, "Y'all are gonna get good grades." I'm not like she didn't do a lot of checking report cards and things like that.
mm,
We kind of just were expected to do what we needed to do, and she gave us the tools to do that. It was more so in the school and just like not so much being compared to like my siblings, but other black students in the school. Like you
mm,
are picked out as like this exceptional one. You're an AP honor student, and so the school really just like reinforces this separation of like you are different from these other students, and then fills you with this like false idea of being superior to these other students who learn differently or just don't fuck with school because school never fucked with them, which
mm,
is totally valid. And so I learned that in school from my educators and administrators more so than anything at home, and was even more so in like college, um, feeling that pressure to like succeed in a different way from other
mhm,
black. That's how you show that you are something different from them. That's how you show that, which never works, but that's how you show that you're exceptional and you don't deserve
mhm.
treatment, or never. I should say it never works completely. Like you're still black,
Yeah.
but I think we also need to acknowledge that it does afford folks different opportunities, and there's a lot that people who are put in those positions have to acknowledge and reject and work against when they're unlearning all of this. It's not enough to just say that this is something that happened. I think that also shades like this whole. I'm really interested in challenging this conversation about like black kids who are othered in school and like
Mm.
you're the different black kids. Black kids didn't like
About
me.
that.
I've written about that. But so much of that comes from this process of like everybody's telling you that you're embracing, even if you're not consciously doing it, this idea that you're better than other black people. And a lot of times other black kids are just responding to that. Um, and I think that we have to do a lot more work as people who've gone through that pipeline, who were, you know, the gifted students and the gifted programs, to deconstruct those narratives and to push back against
Ooh, yes.
the idea of like Black people being this irrationally resistant to difference, which is
Mm,
it doesn't it didn't happen. Like I was homeschooled, I was a Hare Krishna queer kid and in a 70% black school, and I was like homecoming king. I know my story's not everybody else's, but I also know that this story happens a lot more uh,
yeah.
than we're taught. Um, and so
Do,
that and I adopted a lot of that I'm still unlearning. So um, I hope that more people do that work
I
who are
hope
put.
so too. I definitely hope so. Do you kind of still have those experience working in working around TV and in that world is a whole nother right? Do you still kind of feel that or have any of those experiences with other writers or producers or industry experts of color
who
as well?
who are trying to like exceptionalize me
Yes.
or
Or one up constantly feeling as if they're in competition with each other.
yeah, I think that's definitely that comes up constantly, especially in the professional world. Um, I mean, yeah, it's so often that it's not. It wouldn't even be. It wouldn't. I'd be more surprised if someone wasn't doing that than
Mm,
if they were, because that's how capitalism works. If you are a black person trying to tap into this capitalist system, it's because you are putting your foot on other black people's necks, who are ultimately bearing the brunt of this. So yeah, it happens a
mm.
lot, um, which is why I don't necessarily anticipate when I'm in a new working environment becoming best friends with
Eh,
everyone.
most time that does not happen. Trying to tell my children this now, like, do not expect that. So,
Yeah, work is work, even if you love your work.
yes, yes. Now, there is, you kind of mentioned throughout your book, there's something that I definitely love as well that as a culture, we have the ability to make something great out of something so small or out of something that is thrown away by others. And that's so beautiful. I loved how you kind of weave that throughout your book. Um, have you had experiences like that where it was just the opposite of what you wanted, but you turned it into something great?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I've had so many of those. The first thing that comes to mind is the loss of, or like the whole process of like losing my mother. I moved back to North Carolina when she got sick. And that was right when COVID happened, and COVID like shut
Mm,
everything down. And but it also opened up this opportunity for me to go home. And like I was still working a 9 to 5 at the time, and I was able to go back and be with my mother. And she was sick, but we were able to spend this time together. And I don't think that I'd ever felt that close with her. I still wouldn't say like her death was like something great, but I do think that the time that I was able to spend with her in that year was like really the most beautiful, some of the most beautiful moments that I've had and probably ever will have. And it was only because we were living in a pandemic and my mother was really sick. Um, and so, yeah, sometimes things are just bad. Like her passing is just bad. But I think that time period that and that time that I was able to spend with her, was like, we made this work. Even though we were faced with all of this, like all of our family came together and like we all started moving back there. Some of them are still there. I just came temporarily. Um, and we just like, we were a community and we we're
that's
a family, and closer to my family than I have been since probably when I was really little. So yeah.
I like that. It, I hate the term silver lining, but it almost like the sun behind the cloud. I like that. It's that's beautiful, making something beautiful out of something. Well, I know that we are close to our time, and I really enjoyed this whole experience talking with you. I had like 52 more questions I probably could have asked, but I definitely want to make sure that all of our viewers know to go get the book for sure. Go get the book, Black Boy Out of Time. If you don't do anything else, go get the book. I'm gonna just tell you do that. Go get the book. But now, are what's coming up next for you is what I want to ask before I leave. What's
Yeah.
next?
Next is so I just finished working on a season of a TV show. It was the first time I was writing for TV. And
Congrats.
trying to thank you. But now we're in the process of developing my own show, very early
Ah,
stages. It hasn't been there's still a lot of hoops we got to jump through, but so far I've been really good. We've gotten some really Keith, we got
thank you.
some good attachments and some good stuff. So hopefully soon you'll be seeing a show by me on the screen. But
Okay,
like I said,
okay.
TV is such a weird world, so who knows? Who knows?
Well, I love it. I love it. Well, definitely stay in touch with Book Mecca and myself. We would love to have you back, whether or not you're writing another book, you're on the screen, you're doing something amazing, because I know you're going to be doing that. So feel free. You are a part of the Mecca family for sure. So at any point in time, just feel free to reach out.
Thank you, thank you. This was such a good conversation. I really appreciate you having me.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, before I go, I always like to close out with a quote, and I always search for something that kind of inspires the conversation or where I'm trying to go with the conversation or the book that I've just read. And one that jumped out at me, which is from my favorite author, James Baldwin, because I love James Baldwin. Have yes, love him. Um, it says you have to decide who you are and force the world to deal with you, not with its idea of you.
Mm,
And I thought this was a perfect quote to end our conversation today because you have set the stage on this is my story, this is my voice, take it or leave it. Pretty much, and do something with it. Make a change in your own life and in your world. So I appreciate you. Congrats on your book. Congrats
thank
on the next
you.
stage of life. And I look forward to having you back again.
Thank you. Yeah, I would love to come back. Thank you so much.
All right. I want to make sure everyone knows where they can go to follow up with Hari.
Oh, I need to update that website, but
I update the
but
website.
yeah, you can go
You
there.
can go there and follow Hari for all updates and information as well. If you're looking to find out what's coming up next with Book Mecca, whether it's in person events, more interviews with wonderful authors, you can go to follow us on YouTube. You can go to our Instagram page as well as our website, which is bookmecca.org. You can go there as well and keep in contact with us. So, I want to thank everyone as well. Thank you, Hari, again for joining us.
Thank
And goodbye, everyone.